Um, all right, so it's really thank you, Maria, and good morning, everyone. It's a great privilege for me to be invited to speak to this conference, actually for the second time. Last year, we presented a down selection of small modular reactor technologies for Fermi Energia. And this year, we'll present a different kind of down selection exercise, which is screening, um, uh, doing a site survey and screening the sites to identify potential locations where SMRs can be built in Estonia. So this work was performed as a desktop study, as is suggested by the illustration here, and actually due to the COVID situation, it was entirely a desktop study. We actually missed, we were deprived of the best part of the siting project, which is to do a lot of sightseeing. So I make it a personal objective for later this year after vaccination, hopefully to be able to conduct a comprehensive and systematic sightseeing tour of Estonia. The work was done as a collaboration between Tractebel and Estonian company Steiger. And I wish to acknowledge here contributions of Steiger, and in particular of Mrs. Anna Helena Pure, who managed most of the data collection part, and also the environmental study. Wish, of course, to acknowledge the contributions from my colleagues in Tractebel, and to express my appreciation to Henry Ormus of Fermi Energia for overseeing the work, and to Kalev Kalemets for his very useful inputs and insights, knowing also that Kalev has a very good background in geology, among many other things. So let's now move to the next slide and explain what this presentation will cover. We'll cover the scope and objectives of the work. The first three bullets actually are a description of the process that was followed, screening criteria, data management, and the following points are actually the application of the process, and we will present some of the results in terms of areas of interest, candidate sites that have been identified. We'll provide the conclusions and a few words about the follow-on work. To the picture there on this slide is a shot of this famous clint. Clint. You need to know this word if you if you speak to Estonians. The clint is that cliff that is the border of the Gulf of Finland, and so goes along the northern Estonian coast from east to west, or from west to east. And sometimes it's 50 meters high, so sometimes it's in this case here, it's lower elevation. What is nice about the clint is that it displays the actual geology of Estonia, being a superposition of sedimentary rocks of different layers, all very old, prior to the appearance of the first forests on Earth. And it's overlain by a very thin layer of quaternary sediments. We'll come back to that later. And the objectives of the study were quite straightforward. It was to identify 4 to 5 candidate sites. Candidate sites is the expression used in IEA standard to designate the most suitable site locations out of a site survey. Clearly, as a matter of principle, full compliance with IEA guidance was set from the beginning, and we also used experience from past projects that was applied to this one. This site survey is a preparatory step prior to a formal application under the Estonian designated spatial planning procedure, which is managed by the Estonian administration. The sites we were looking for had to have the capacity to host multi-unit SMR plant of at least 600 megawatt electric capacity. For considering a set of pre-selected technologies for which we built an envelope of basic parameters, very basic ones, such as plant footprint and cooling water requirements or minimum soil properties. Just to show where this fits into the overall IAEA siting process, well, it's the first step. It's a site survey. Then according to the milestone, IAEA milestone definition, this is actually phase one, and prior to the site evaluation. So the site survey will identify suitable candidate sites, that's the objective, and prepare all information required to go into the next phase of scoring and ranking the different candidate sites and making a selection of the preferred site. Note that site confirmation will only be reached after site characterization, which is the next box here, for which that's where the more extensive field surveys are carried out, and the plan design basis is determined, and the safety analysis report for the siting chapter is prepared. All right. Moving on to the next slide. So the nice thing about siting is also that it's absolutely multidisciplinary. It covers a range of disciplines from environment, as you can see here to the left, cultural heritage, demography, to more physical aspects of topography, bathymetry, geology, seismic activity, geotechnical, flooding, and back to more human attributes such as human-induced hazards and land use and ownership and infrastructure. There are a few other ones which will come later in the picture. So data are collected for all those disciplines, and they need to be collected in a careful way. IAEA is very insistent on the need to have a data management system set up right from the beginning to review the data for accuracy, reliability of the source. Then once they are validated, to decide whether they should be entered into the project database, a database in the form of a geographical information system. And that database will be over time enriched with more data that will be acquired in the later phases. The process of screening is quite straightforward. We start from regions of interest, and in the case of Estonia, this quickly defaulted to coastal regions because the use of water inland from rivers of lakes is quite restricted. So starting from those regions, we apply a first set of screening criteria to determine areas of interest. The first set of criteria are more of a global macro scale application. Then looking deeper into each of those areas of interest, we apply the remaining set of criteria to come up with potential sites, and among them we select the best ones as candidate sites. The criteria that are applied are either purely exclusionary, meaning black or white, no go situation, so you shall not build here type, and this applies, for instance, to Natura 2000 environmental restrictions. And we also have discretionary criteria, which are a little bit softer and judgmental, and allow us to factor in other aspects which have an impact on project cost and risk, actually. So a two-step approach was followed. This is a table showing the different attributes for each of those steps. Step one, you read it from the slide. And again, these are applied at the overall countrywide scale. And step 2, for each area of interest, we go deeper and to more local objects such as cultural heritage or hazardous facilities or local geological properties, as well as grid infrastructure, land use at the local scale. So I'll now illustrate this, the step 1 by selecting three attributes. Of course, there are quantitative criteria that are not explained here, but for instance, for airports, there is a defined shape of exclusion area. For distance to capable faults, it's 5 kilometers to a mapped fault. So we have quantitative criteria for each of them. So to illustrate, this is the I have some echo, which should be suppressed if you can. Natura 2000 exclusion is quite extensive, as you can see. It takes out the whole of the western part of the coast, and also big blocks of the northern coast. And even when it's only a line, like the okay, I'm trying to move my arrow, but I cannot see it. Okay, I don't. If you see my arrow, this is a cliff that, and also we have rivers like salmon rivers, and the larger river here are excluded. So very impacting exclusion criteria from environment. On the population density, to the contrary, this Estonia is a low population country, low population density, except for the capital Tallinn, and so this was not quite restrictive in terms of identifying sites. Faults, geological faults. What you see on the screen is actually buffer zones along identified geological faults that affect the bedrock. And let me be clear that it's not that there is a real risk of surface rupture of such faults in Estonia. I think the risk is almost nil, but it takes time and resources to demonstrate that it is the case if you are too close to an existing fault. So we prefer to stay away from that, which it's rather a cost avoidance decision than a real hazard, I would say. In the case of Estonia, which would not be the case, of course, in seismic active areas. Just a few words on the geology. Well, you saw the picture of the Clint, and you see here a cross section from north to south, from the Gulf of Finland to Latvia, the north being on the right side and Latvia to the left side. And you see here this superposition of very old sedimentary rocks overlaying on top of the crystalline basement, and a very thin layer of quaternary sediments. There are implications, technical implications to this, which I cannot cover in detail right now, but one of the good things is that you're almost certain to find a competent rock anywhere below at a few meters depth, which is good for foundations. So now, superposing all the step 1 criteria, 1 to 6, and adding, of course, the C as an exclusion zones, we see that we have many restrictions. Some of them could be refined or lifted, but we end up with a sufficient number of distinct areas of interest where we are about sure to find potential sites within each of those. So we have 2 here to the west. Only one location in Pärnu here is not protected from Natura 2000. There's one on top here, Keibu Aliklepa, in the western part of Varju. Pakri Peninsula, I won't spend time there, but we didn't find a suitable site there because it's all locked in by environmental restrictions. There's one area here in the eastern part of Harju, which we'll talk about. Another one in western Viru, and last one in eastern Viru. So what I want now to illustrate is the application of the follow-on, the set 2, the second set of criteria to this area here in the western part of Harju. So this map shows the mapping of hazardous facilities and hazardous networks, such as this red line here from left to right, which is the gas pipeline. And okay, so collecting those data, you can see that there is an empty area here at the center of the picture, which is suitable from free of any human-induced hazard. When we look at the same area, okay, the coast is not very visible, but this is the coastline. From a bathymetry and topography point of view, we see that we can access deep water at 3 different sites, from 3 sites. That on the topography, we are above the flooding limit. We are not too high in elevation. Actually, it's a very flat area, topographically speaking. So this area is quite good for identifying a potential site. Going on with other informations, the land use in this case, where of course we don't want to define sites in built-up areas or harbors or other infrastructure, nor in places where there's already a planning procedure that is launched. And here we can see that we have the same area I was talking about is as green covers, but so it's mildly sensitive from an environmental standpoint, but it's actually a managed forestry of large area for which it would be acceptable to carve out, let's say, half a square kilometer for locating a nuclear power plant. And finally, the cadastral information is available to, and we see here that we actually have state-owned, large parcels of state-owned land. This is certainly preferable to very fragmented private property. So that's an illustration for this single area where we superpose everything, and we can identify this gray rectangle here as a potential area for a site. This area is too big for it doesn't define really the site boundary, and as you can see, it can be moved around a little bit up or left. Anyway, we designate this site as the Cabernet site. Problems with my mouse, okay, in the center here. And we proceed similarly for the other areas of interest that I've shown before. We have, therefore, we have a site in Hapsi down here, another one in Keibu, Aliklepa, Cabernet, Kunda. And for Luganuse, we actually have 3 distinct sites with very different properties, and we felt that at this point we were entitled to choose one over the other. They have very different characteristics. So we kept all 3 options for now. On the contrary, we dropped the Keibu and Hapsi site because looking at the infrastructure, those sites are not well served in terms of grid, and neither in terms of transportation, road networks, and railways. All right, so this is actually the result of the project. I would now need to check time, and I have another 5 minutes to go to go through each of those sites if time allows, if I'm not overrunning. So very quickly then, we're going through each of the sites, just a few words about each of them. So the Kunda site has this very good attribute that there is a harbor there to deliver the large items, large modules or equipment, or even bulk material that could be delivered right away at the site. And it's what you see there is municipality-owned land. It has a bit of a problem in terms of the elevation, and therefore the flooding risk or the maximum probable flood level should be assessed more carefully according to nuclear standards, for considering very extreme meteorological events and also the effect of climate change over a long period. Therefore, we'll probably move from the initially considered site, which was next to this corridor here, and move further up north to define the precise boundary for that site. The Moldova site, a little to the east. Well, this site is objectively an excellent site as a seashore power plant, allowing for direct cooling by the sea. Now I'm saying objectively because the landowners may not see it that way. And so that illustrates the fact that site selection part has to factor in all, well, certainly to have stakeholder engagement of the different stakeholders, not only the landowners, but certainly the landowners, and to weigh the different advantages and disadvantages of a particular site, considering many different aspects. In the back of the picture, you see those mountains. Well, there are no mountains in Estonia, so these are artificial mountains of slag heap near Kohtla-Järve from the long time exploitation of oil shale. And we are actually getting nearer to these slag heaps for the following site, AA. That's the blue rectangle there, which is inland. And that causes a little bit of a disadvantage because it should be a closed loop cooling. When I talk about cooling, I mean condenser cooling, right? It's a pure conventional cooling of the condenser, not the reactor itself. And so that would be a closed loop cooling, but you do need to have makeup water from the sea to that closed loop. Which would require then to have a 4.5 kilometer distance of pipes and a pump station at the sea, and pump this water up to an elevation of 47 meters. So that's the disadvantage, and we are going to try and quantify that in terms of the plant efficiency and the cost of the cooling system. But the site has many other very positive attributes of being large, flat, well served by infrastructure, and easy to connect to the grid. And actually, it would also offer a possibility for district heating of the nearby Kohtla-Järve city. Aidu site is not so far from there, a little bit to the south. That's where oil shale was exploited for a long time. So trenches were digged. And they have now become some kind of artificial lake, which you see on the picture there, with many ramifications. And so that would be the source of cooling, again in a closed loop system. And definitely we would need to ascertain make certain that that water basin would not get depleted over a long period of time, that there's sufficient groundwater input to the lake. We are not talking about big volumes of water to be pumped for a closed loop system. The advantages is it's a brownfield site. It used to be where the oil shale was processed. It's owned by the state, and it has excellent infrastructure, even a railway into the site, and great connectivity to the nearby Püssi substation. All right, and so you understand now why we did keep those three sites, which I just talked about, which are located on the same municipality of Lüganuse. The last one, Cabernet, is the one I illustrated before, and this is a state-owned land. As I said, it's a large managed forestry, but you know, with conifers, not very old trees. It was pointed out that there might be some public acceptance issues. So we have nearby nice cities along the coast in Neme, Cabernet. But maybe this is an opportunity to stress again that small modular reactors are hyper safe. They emit no fume, no pollution, and actually the vendors have made a big effort on the architectural aspect of those facilities, which do not look like industrial facilities anymore. So in other words, it may be quite a good neighbor actually to have an SMR facility. All right, so I've just gone through all of those sites that are kept as the best candidate sites. We see that we have indeed identified several valuable sites in northern Estonia, actually all were east of Tallinn. Now we should conduct focus studies to answer specific questions. I mentioned the cooling aspects to differentiate between some of the sites, and maybe enhanced flooding study. So very focused studies to answer specific questions. And we'll then finalize summary files that have already been prepared to gather information on each of those sites as an input to downstream to the scoring and ranking of each of those sites per the IAEA guidance. With all of that, Fermi Energia would be ready to prepare to formally submit the application under the National Spatial Planning Procedure of Estonia. This is the end of my presentation. I hope you found it informative, and I will be ready to take questions.
Philippe, thank you very much for that extremely thorough overview. And for those of us who would like to have a nuclear power plant in our backyard, I guess we now know where to buy real estate for the future. If you don't mind, I do have a couple of questions for you. And the first one is actually related to the siting process. So is the siting process for an SMR any different from that of a conventional large nuclear power plant?
Well, the rules for siting are not defined specifically for SMR, so they are the same ones as for large nuclear power plants. Now, but there are specific features of small modular reactors that are quite advantageous. One, probably the main one, is that the fact that all vendors make the promise to demonstrate that the emergency planning zone would be restricted to the site boundary, so that in effect there would not be an emergency plan needed for the population nearby. And likewise, that would also make the site characterization work a little bit easier. We would not need a very detailed site-specific atmospheric dispersion analysis, and because we would use a generic one from the vendor that applies to the site boundary. Therefore, no big meteorological station at the site itself to measure all kinds of site-specific parameters. I'm not saying that we would be cutting corners, but it's really an opportunity to indeed simplify a little bit the site characterization phase. But also, when we select a site, we are careful to select sites which have kind of homogeneous geotechnical properties, so that we can simplify the borehole plans for obtaining that information. So, in other words, in a summary, the rules are the same. The applicable safety guideline is the same, but we can hope for simplifications by design of the SMRs and also by proper site selection.
There's another question to you from the audience, and the question is as follows. In your analysis, have you also considered the large energy consumers, industrial consumers in particular, as one of the factors?
Yes, it is an attraction factor. Now, contrary to other countries, Estonia doesn't have a lot of large industrial facilities. But in the case of the Kunda site, for instance, we know that the reactor could serve the needs for the nearby paper mill. In the overall realm of defining criteria, although it seems that like there's a lot of emphasis on negative criteria of exclusion, don't go there, don't go here. We do also have attraction criteria, and I think it's very important that they are explicitly recognized. And so proximity actually to small cities that can benefit from district heating, or to industries, or also to small cities that can afford the accommodation for working people. Also, not be in a very remotely and isolated place. I think it's a shift in paradigm in terms of site location for SMRs. But yes, and also in the direction that was mentioned by was mentioned before about multi-purpose SMRs, the industrial applications are certainly something that will require co-location of sites nearby industries.
We also sometimes get this fairly intriguing question of why do you want to build it on land? Couldn't you build it on one of the small islands off the coast? How would you respond to that?
That's what the Finns do, right? Loviisa is on an island just across the Gulf of Finland from Estonia. Well, that would be fine. You just have to lift all the Natura 2000 exclusions. So that's we didn't find any location including islands that was not protected by environmental restrictions in Estonia.
And then finally, what is for an SMR in Estonia? What would be the minimal distance to populated area or an industrial area?
The answer from the vendors to the question, we sent the questionnaire to them on the low population zone. First of all, low population zone is defined as a requirement in the United States, but it's not explicitly defined as a prescribed limit by IEA. IEA defines that mandates that you will have to demonstrate the feasibility of an emergency plan. But so the answer to the question is it can be a very short distance. You've seen the densely populated areas on one of the maps, and the criteria we used was 200 people per square kilometer, which means 2 people per hectare. So that's not very dense. Okay, so as long as we are outside of those areas, I think we are okay. Now it's a matter also of acceptance by nearby landowners, and so it's a matter of prudence and just kindness, I would say, to let probably a kilometer or so, or 2 kilometers from the nearby homes or populated areas.
Philippe, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to the progress,
My pleasure.
the progress for next year. Thank you again.